Welcome back, welcome back. After a long summer hiatus, the Zoom Bible study returns for the fall. Thank you for taking the time to be a part of this online study. Tonight, I begin a new study, Healing the Distorted Images of God. One of my resources for this study is an old workbook by Dale and Juanita Ryan titled Recovery from Distorted Images of God. You know, our images of God are important to our spiritual well being on many levels. They affect how we feel about God. For instance, if a person sees God as an abusive parent, most likely that person will be afraid of God and feel like everything they do for God is at gunpoint, or they simply run from God with no intention of ever returning. Our image of God also affects how we interpret the Bible and even how we see ourselves. Now, there are a lot of reasons for these distorted images. I'll give three. One is bad preaching. Most of the time is well-intentioned, but nonetheless unhealthy. In most cases, the preacher is just repeating what they have been taught, but bad preaching or bad theology will certainly lead to distorted images of God. Another reason is parenting. We all know the influence of parents on their children. As Siemens writes in his book, Healing for Damaged Emotions, he writes, most of our basic patterns of relating come from the patterns of the relationships of our family. End of quote. And since God is often portrayed as a parent, if we were raised by parents who were overly focused on rules, we may have the tendency to see God as some sort of cosmic cop. And it's too easy sometimes for our experiences with our earthly parents to transfer over to our image of God. Now, let me be clear. I don't believe that parents do this on purpose. At least most of them don't. It just happens. The third reason is projections. As the Greeks taught us, we humans often create gods in our own image. And subconsciously, we may project our bad qualities on God, sort of like a defense mechanism, because to admit our bad qualities can sometimes be hard to do. And so sometimes people portray a mean God, not because God is, but because they are. And if God has the same traits as I do, I can't be too bad, right? And again, that's just three reasons: bad preaching, parenting, and projections. And I'm sure there are many, many more. But tonight, let's look at the distortion of the God of impossible expectations. The God of impossible expectations. And how do we get healing from that? I go back to David Seaman's. God is seen as a figure on top of a tall ladder. The person says to themselves, I'm going to climb up to God now. I'm God's child and I want to please God more than I want anything else. So they start climbing, rung by rung, working so hard until their knuckles are bleeding and their shins are bruised. Finally, they reach the top only to find that God has moved up three rungs. So they try a little harder. They climb and struggle. But when they get up there, God has gone up another three rungs. God is that little inner voice that always says, that's not quite good enough. The God of impossible expectations is a distorted image of God. And if we don't get this image of God clarified, then, as Siemens says, we eventually end up with a distorted image not only of God, but also of ourselves. We start believing that we're not good enough, that we're not worthy, or even that we are unlovable. And here's another thing. If we feel like we are never good enough and can never please this God of impossible expectations, then usually we end up being overly critical and judgmental of everybody else around us. None of this is good. So, what are some of the biblical passages that counter such a distortion of God? Let's first go to Psalm 103. You are merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. Your indignation doesn't endure forever, and your anger lasts only for a short time. You never treat us as our sins deserve. You don't repay us in kind for the injustices we do. For as high as heaven is above the earth, so great is the love of those who revere you. As far away as the east is from the west, that's how far you remove our sins from us. As tenderly as parents treat their children, that's how you treat your children, O Lord, for you know what we are made of. You remember that we're nothing but dust. Now, Psalm 103 does not paint God as vindictive, nor does it portray God as a God of impossible expectations. God knows that we are dust. God knows we are human. God knows that we're going to mess up. So therefore, God is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. So Psalm 103 gives us that image of God that counters the distorted image. The next example comes from Jesus. And remember this throughout the study. This is lesson 1, but remember it throughout the study. Jesus is the exact imprint of God's very being. So if we want to know what God is really like, we look at Jesus. Now, let me be clear. Certainly, Jesus demands a lot when it comes to discipleship. Recently, we've had several weeks of the hard sayings of Jesus in our gospel lectionary readings on Sunday. But here's the thing, that even as hard as the demands may be, when the disciples failed, Jesus always forgave and encouraged them to get back to it. And my favorite example of this comes from John chapter 21. Now, certainly there was a failure on part of the 12 during Jesus's trial, his arrest, his trial, and crucifixion. It was a failure of discipleship. They all ran in fear. They all hid. They all abandoned Jesus. But in all the post-resurrection appearances, Jesus simply extends his peace to them. Never do we see Jesus lecturing them. He doesn't go into this "I told you so" business or anything like that. And then in John 21, we have the first extended conversation between Jesus and Peter, the one who really failed and denied him 3 times. So what happened? In John 21, after Jesus fed the disciples breakfast, he asked Peter, "Do you love me more than these?" Now remember that Peter before the crucifixion, had said, looking at all the other disciples, even if they deny you, Lord, I won't. Then Jesus, of course, said that before the rooster crows, that Peter would deny him 3 times, and it happened just like that. So John 21 records a conversation that Jesus and Peter had to have. And so after Jesus asked him, "Do you love me more than these?" Peter replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus responded, "Feed my lambs." Jesus asked him the same question a second time, and Peter responds in the same way. Then Jesus said, "Tend my sheep." And finally, Jesus asked the same question the third time. And once again, Peter, now frustrated, affirmed his love yet again. And this time, Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." So, what's going on here? Is Jesus playfully rubbing it in by asking Peter the same question 3 times in order to get Peter to affirm his love for him 3 times to kind of cancel out the 3 times that he denied him? Probably. But I think something better is going on. And we miss it because we read it in English. And in English, we have just one word for love: love. And we must use context to get the meaning of love in English. We know there's a difference in stating your love for your favorite flavor of ice cream versus the expression of love for your spouse. So in English, since there's only one word for love, we are very dependent on the context to understand the meaning of love. But in the Greek, there are different words for different types of love. And the word itself will tell you what type of love it's talking about. And it's when we read John 21 in the Greek that we see what's really going on here. You see, the first time that Jesus asked Peter, "Peter, do you love me more than these?" Jesus used the word agape, which is the highest form of love. And Jesus said, "Peter, do you agape me more than these?" And Peter, now humbled, he's still dealing with this failure. He's honest with the Lord, and he says, "I phileo you." Now, phileo is a good type of love. It's a brotherly love, a kinship love. It's a family love. You know, Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, filio, brotherly love, that family kinship. So Jesus said, "Do you agape me?" And Peter says, "I phileo you." In other words, I love you, but maybe I don't love you as much as I thought I did. And then Jesus asked the second time, "Peter, do you agape me?" And the second time, Peter responds, "I phileo you." But then the beauty comes. The third time, Jesus asked, "Do you phileo me?" And Peter says, "Yes, I phileo you." You see, Jesus understood that in that moment, Peter could only give him filial love. Peter was being real with Jesus, maybe for the first time in a long time. And Jesus was okay with that. God is not a God of impossible expectations. Just do our best. Give God what we have, including our best efforts. And if all we have is filial love, give that to God. And before you know it, God will take that filial love and transform it into the agape love that changed the world, just like what God did with Peter's filial love. Yes, the demands of discipleship are high. But when, not if, but when we fail, God doesn't get mad. God doesn't berate us. And God never gives up on us. Instead, God picks us up, dusts us off, forgives us, and encourages us to get back to it. As I've said many times before, God believes in us more than we believe in God. And who wouldn't want to serve such a God who is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love? And one more thing, and let's not forget this. Jesus really simplified living the Christian life. First, Jesus gave us the golden rule. Simply, do unto others as you would have them do to you. That doesn't sound like a God of impossible expectations, does it? And when asked what the greatest commandment was, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. In other words, if we can get loving God and loving one another, everything else is going to take care of itself. We're going to do the right thing. Love God, love others, do unto others as you would have them do to you. If we do those three things, we're doing what God asks of us. We are living Christianity. You know, God isn't the one complicating things with impossible demands. We are. We do not have a God of impossible expectations. So let's embrace the simplicity of the gospel that Jesus taught and know that we have a God who knows we are dust, knows we're human. And so therefore, God is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. What a God to serve. What a God to love. Until next Wednesday, God's abundant grace and peace to you.